Hello, I'm Craig O'Neill. So glad you could join me for another Diamond Book Award nominee. We've got a book picked out that you're really going to enjoy. And you know, I'll tell you this before we get to my favorite thing to do in the whole wide world, and that's read a book. Books can come from anywhere. It can come from fantasy, or it can come from maybe romance, or it can come from history, American history. And so it is with today's book, A Scarf for Keiko. This one comes from a scene, or actually a story, that took place in World War II. And we want to thank Car-Ben Publishing for letting us read this wonderful story. The needles slipped from Sam's hands and the wool tangled up in knots. Knitting made him want to pull out his hair. Next to him, Keiko bent over her wool. Her needles flew like the wind. Click, clack, click, clack, click, clack. Rows of blue stitches grew inch by inch. Their teacher said, "Good work, Keiko," Mrs. Olson said. "Having a problem, Sam?" Click, clack, click, clack, click, clack. "Remember, pick up your yarn, wrap it around the needle, pull the stitch through," the teacher said. "We must do our part for the war effort. Our soldiers are counting on you, Sam." "That's a mistake," Sam thought. "I'm a terrible knitter. No one should count on me." In the lunchroom, Sam felt a tap on his shoulder. Keiko smiled at him. She said, "I can help you with your knitting." Keiko was Sam's next-door neighbor. Ever since President Roosevelt had declared war on Japan in December, some of Sam's friends refused to talk to Keiko and the other Japanese-American students who attended the First Street School in Boyle Heights. Sam mumbled, "I don't need any help," and he turned away. Keiko's smile disappeared. She said, "Suit yourself." She turned her back and sat at an empty table. After lunch, Sam played catch with his best friend Jack. Jack asked the question of Sam, "Hey, have you heard from Mike?" as Jack caught the ball smoothly. Sam shook his head when he thought about his older brother fighting in the war. Sam's stomach tied up in knots like the yarn on his desk. Jack said, "Don't worry. He's probably too busy winning the war to write a letter." After school, Sam saw Keiko pedaling past him down East First Street on her fire-engine red bicycle. A car slowed down. A teenage boy leaned out the window. Splat! An egg landed on the sidewalk, and the boy yelled, "Go back to Japan!" Her bike skidded, but Keiko didn't fall. She pedaled even faster around the corner as Sam watched. That night, Sam listened to the radio with his parents. President Roosevelt was announcing the latest war news. Sam asked his parents, "Do you think we're going to win?" And his dad said, "Well, if we all do our part. I hear that you're knitting for the soldiers. Good for you, Sam." "Knitting again," Sam sighed. On the way to school, Keiko's brakes screeched at the crosswalk. "Hello, Sam." Knitting needles stuck out of her bag. Standing next to Jack, Sam pretended not to hear her. "How's Mike?" The lights changed and they pushed across the street. "I hope he's okay," Keiko shouted, flying down the street. Jack elbowed Sam. "You shouldn't talk to Keiko, Saitos. What would Mike think?" Sam's brother had helped Keiko fix her bicycle once. He had shown her how to patch a flat tire and grease the chain. Mike wouldn't mind Sam talking to Keiko, but that was too hard to explain to Jack. And Sam said, "Oh, I didn't talk to her. She talked to me." On Friday, Mom asked Sam to go to her favorite flower shop in Little Tokyo to pick up flowers for the Shabbat table. The trolley stopped in front of Mr. Saitos' grocery store. Mr. Saitos was sweeping up broken glass. Sam got off the trolley with his head down. Mr. Saitos didn't see him. The flower shop was closed. Just before sunset, Mom lit the Shabbat candles and said the blessing. After they sat down, Dad said the blessings over the wine and the challah. As they began to eat, Dad cleared his throat. Dad said, President Roosevelt is worried that people with Japanese ancestors are spies. He's sending them away. Mom shook her head. This war is terrible. My sisters in Poland are in great danger. Mike is risking his life to fight. And now little Tokyo looks like a ghost town. Sam put down his fork. He said, But Keiko isn't a spy. And Dad said, Of course she isn't. And Mom nodded. I'm going to invite the Saitos for dinner tomorrow. They're good Americans and the best neighbors. Keiko wasn't at school on Monday. Knitting was a disaster. Sam almost poked himself in the eye. He threw down his needles. I can't do it, he said. Mrs. Olson, the teacher, said he could write a letter to Mike, his brother fighting in the war, instead. And the letter said, Dear Mike, I'm sorry that I won't be able to knit you a pair of socks. I'm a terrible knitter. Keiko's the best knitter in our class, but she may have to go away soon. Please come home safely, your brother Sam. After school, Keiko was sitting on her front steps. Sam called out, Hello, Keiko. She didn't look up. The only sound was her needles. Click, 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 click. Mom told Sam, Hey, the Saitos can't come to dinner. They have to pack. They just learned they're being sent north to an internment camp in the desert. She gestured at the unfamiliar tea set on the kitchen table. They can only bring what they can carry, so I offered to take care of Mrs. Saitos' precious tea set. I told her it will be here when they get home. Sam asked his mother, How long will they be away? And his mother sighed, No one knows. And then they were gone. The morning after the Saitos left, Sam saw it, Keiko's bicycle in front of his house. On the handlebars was a pair of blue wool socks with a note attached. The note said, Dear Sam, here are the socks I knitted for Mike. Tell him to come home safely. Your friend and neighbor, Keiko. P.S. You can borrow my bike until I get back. Sam shivered. The desert where Keiko was going would be cold at night. In his mother's yarn bag, Sam found a ball of red wool. Socks were too hard to make, but Sam could knit something else for Keiko. He remembered Mrs. Olson's advice. Pick up the yarn, wrap it around the needle, put the stitch through. Click, clack, click, clack, click, clack, click, clack, click, clack. Watch him go. Click, clack, click, clack. Come home safely, Mike and Keiko. Click, clack, click, clack, click, clack, click, clack, click, clack. Come home safely. Come home safely. Sam's needles flew faster and faster, and rows of red stitches grew inch by inch. And then he sent a note that said, Dear Keiko, I wanted to make this scarf for you to wear while you're away. Your friend, Sam. Wow. Keiko got a scarf from Sam, who learned to knit and sent her something warm while she was cold in the desert. This is a story that's based on a problem that war always creates. We're seeing it now in Ukraine, but that's a different story. This story teaches us so much about understanding each other, even though the world may not realize what it's done to relationships. Hope you enjoyed it. We'll have more Diamond Book Award nominees on this channel.